should have lots of this. Ah, well, would you believe it? Oh, we got there in the end. Yes, good morning. um, it's a Monday morning, Monday blues. Every time that we open up the newspapers now, it seems as if there is just another crisis around the corner. And I suppose, really, we should concentrate on what's going on overseas and in the Ukraine. And indeed, I've been I've been pounding on about it, that we don't seem to have been making that much sense out of the way that we behaved. That we've actually been paying too much attention to cream cake. Oh no, sorry, that's iced cake, and too little to the fact that we've got um, a Russian dictator, and I use the word advisedly, because the Russia is a sort of a democracy in some ways. And speak to a Russian, and they sort of say, well, your head of state is unelected. And they're quite right, because they're talking about the Queen. On the other hand, is the way that the Russian president and others are elected leaves a lot to be desired. But anyway, he is the man in charge of a large number of troops, some pretty heavy firepower, all amassed on the Ukraine border. And we have actually over the weekend withdrawn our diplomats from that country. And that is always a serious sign. Now, we had a lot of saber rattling by our own politicians, all from the West, as we're going to do this, that, and the other. And what it turns out is that we're just going to lend firepower to the Ukrainians, because we've now discovered there are all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't actually go to war. So I therefore tend to think that the Russian bear is going to see that as a weakness. And, excuse me, I keep my voice velvet this morning. And that we will see very shortly the first incursion into Ukraine. Now, I also listened to some so-called experts over the weekend, and undoubtedly their expertise about Ukraine and that part of the world, the old CIS, the Russian Federation, and so on, is much greater than mine. Although the point is that really I've lived there and worked there, both in Ukraine and Russia. And for that matter, places like Armenia in the South Caucasus, all former members of the Russian Federation. Russian Federation. They are members, most of them are anyway, of the old Soviet Union. And there is a great deal of sympathy, particularly amongst older people, for the Russian way of life, because we in the West have, particularly the EU, have rushed in and thrown in privatization programs without actually thinking them out too carefully. And in fact, some of the principles that we've established in the EU and other countries, such as globalization, are now turning out to be not at all favoured in our own countries. So not only have we had a confused policy, but our policies, generally speaking, put a lot of people out of work without trying to figure out how they would be supported. And this is particularly true in that area of Ukraine, in the east, in Donbass area, where the Russians are massed on the border, and which actually borders the Soviet Union. Not the Soviet Union, no, the Russian Federation. My apologies. So, I think we're in a really dangerous situation, because if land forces cross into Ukraine, in that part of the country, they may well find not too much resistance, because a lot of the older people in that part of the world actually speak Russian. They don't speak Ukrainian. They actually speak Russian, and they live in many ways a Russian way of life. And they are sympathetic to what they saw as a state that looked after them and made sure that they didn't go hungry. So I think that it's a pretty difficult one. Now, I also want to talk about freedom of expression and so on in a moment. But let's first of all just go through the newspaper headlines, shall we? Because what I just said about the Ukraine is dominating the headlines this morning. The Prime Minister urges Russia to step back from the brink. Well, you can urge, and oh, that tastes good. It's a sort of a milky drink. I've been pushing for some sort of action myself, at least banging on about how we need to stand up to the Russians on the border. But by the same token, diplomacy probably is not going to work. I hope it does, and I would fully support the idea that we actually attempt diplomacy. But I think we've also got to be ready for the fact that the world might just be plunged into war, because so goes the Russian-Ukraine border, so goes the rest of the world. And will, in fact, Mr. Putin, President Putin, stop there? Will he go back to the old stomping grounds of Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia? Will he go back to the Balkans, Vilnius, Lithuania? The other two Balkan countries. Why is it that just at the last minute I always forget these things? Latvia and the third one, it'll come back in a moment. It begins with an E. That is an underbelly too, because there is a small piece of Russia. The other side of that is split by these states, and also there is no love lost between these countries and Belarus. So it's a very volatile part of the world, and I'm not at all sure that diplomacy in this particular instance it will work. It may be that we do have to brandish a few candlesticks of our own. But there we are. And on the eye, tensions rise in Ukraine as the West steps up efforts to stop the invasion. And the Times, leaders in final push to avert Ukrainian invasion. When the papers are all on the same theme, you know that there is it's quite a serious issue, and they are this morning all on the old theme, the same theme. Countdown to war, says the Mirror. The world holds its breath, and indeed, if in fact we do get to fisticuffs and throwing missiles at each other, then indeed I think the world does have to worry. These things, you can say that they'll be contained. These things quite often are not contained. Once the first shot is fired, away it goes. The Daily Mail, frantic 48 hours to save Europe from war. It again talks about the diplomacy and the negotiations going on to try and stop any outbreak of hostilities. The Daily Express, Boris urges Putin to step back from the brink. The Metro, West can't Vladdy scare Putin, says the Metro. It's trying to make a little bit of a joke of it, but nonetheless it's a serious issue. It's a very serious issue. And the Financial Times, Scholz plans fresh Ukraine talks as the West steps up evacuation. Well, when the Financial Times leads the same as the other papers, then you know that it is something that we should pay attention to, because it quite often will see a difference in importance because it's a financial paper. The Guardian, A damning race report reveals vast inequalities across the health service. The Guardian takes a different view, and what it's talking about, I think, is some survey that was taken over the it was revealed last week, towards the end of last week, and that there are a lot of differences in NHS pay and the benefits and so on and so forth. And what it's saying is that the race enters into this to some extent. I can well believe because there are a large element of our society that think that if we take the knee and if we do all those sort of things, is what we're doing is we're having a go at racism. But racism isn't something, or any other ism for that matter, isn't something that just disappears overnight. People are raised thinking one thing, and to have their minds changed depends upon their ability to accept new notions and new thoughts and new ways of living. It's not just saying don't do that. So I think that the Guardian, whom I probably would have differences with from time to time, is quite right in highlighting that. And the Daily Star. Right, okay. Well, the Star, deadly Dudley to hit 100 miles per hour. It is warning us that we are going to have some pretty heavy storms in the middle of this week, and that we must be very careful about how we go out, how we leave loose stuff around, how we lock down for a couple of days of pretty heavy weather. And once again, the Star is right to highlight that, because those storms can be devastating and dangerous. And the Sun has totally... the Sun doesn't, for some reason, doesn't really, very often, it did last week over the ice cake issue with the Prime Minister. Not a drop of alcohol in it, I assure you. It seems to wander off onto other issues, and this one is the RAF chief flashed his bum at a neighbour, and an air marshal in the RAF has been suspended because in an argument with his neighbour, he said he took his trousers down and sort of showed his buttocks and said, that to you, sir. I'm not even sure what the fight was about. But generally speaking, the serious papers, serious journalists are concentrating very much on what's happening in Ukraine. And I think that's absolutely right. Now, I don't wish to be unkind, and I'm not absolutely sure that I can't go to prison for showing this, because we, when I was working in the Balkans and the Baltics, and for that matter, a little bit in Africa, I was a bit naughty, and I taught journalists a little ditty, which comes from the songs, and I think it's Bing Crosby and the Yankee in the Court of King Arthur. I'm not 100% sure of that, but anyway, I said to a number of people that I was mixing with is, let's sing this to the EU, because they're all a bit jobsworthy, and I did it in fun, and I hope that perhaps this will be taken in fun. I just can't help it, but remember it.
Trying to find lots of things not to do. We're busy going nowhere, isn't it just a crime? We'd like to be unhappy, but we never do have the time.
It's not going to make the top 10, that's for sure. Oh dear. When I start to sing, the whole world closed down. And you didn't hear quite. It was, we're busy doing nothing, working the whole day through, trying to find lots of things not to do. We're busy going nowhere. Isn't it just a crime? We'd like to be unhappy, but we never do have the time. And it's one of those things that um, uh, it is interesting because we have people who log in from various countries with different they tune into us, and I'm not absolutely sure where they're from because I don't recognise the language. But anyway, we've got somebody there, and welcome. Whether you're a friend or foe, doesn't matter. We are full of isms and log log jams and you name it. Loggerheads is what I'm after. I think loggerheads. Uh, but freedom of expression. That is the important thing. And is that under threat? Now, my critics, of which there are many, will say, hey, Keith, you are trying to tell us to focus on what was happening in Russia and the Ukraine all last week and complaining that where we were aiming our, what should we say, our concentration was on the iced cake at Christmas that Boris was supposed to have consumed, and the bottle of champagne and the half-eaten packet of crisps. And you were saying, no, keep an eye on the world. And now you're saying, hey, it's almost there. We've got problems on our borders, so what I want you to do is to look at a domestic matter. Well, this domestic matter, I think, is worth taking a look at. The Online Safety Act, I think it's called, went into operation over the weekend. And what I dearly hope is that it is the proponents of this and the government and those people who are responsible for making sure that legislation is totally acceptable have gone it through it with a fine-tooth comb. Mostly it's on about hate speech and the effect on prostitutes and that sort of thing from what's posted on the internet. And that's all very worthy, but it seems to me, in looking at the stuff that's posted on the internet, in the internet itself, is that it is sufficiently vague for governments and authority to take advantage to close down or to certainly try to stop people such as me. Because when I read the wording, it's no, I don't peddle hate, but I am fiercely critical of the government at all levels. And I just want to make sure in my own mind that everybody has gone through it with a very fine tooth comb. Now, I want for a moment to pause to say what is happening in Canada. And it is strange because a lot of people that I actually would admire for their broad thinking have really dismissed this truck loggers issue in Canada. But my relatives, who are decent, sane, nice, ordinary working people, are very upset and very concerned about the issue, because they say that freedoms are beginning to be squeezed by the Canadian government. And several senior commentators have expressed the view that legislation there that has been brought in terms of both internet and other freedoms is designed to curb dissent amongst the Canadian people for their government. And as a consequence, the dissent is growing. But the legislation there is also aimed at making sure that it doesn't. And Canadians are a nice, in many ways, gentle people. Oh, they can be a bit rough around the edges, and I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to take on a Canadian in in a logging camp. Let's put it that way. They can be rough and tough, but they are, generally speaking, a mild people. They aren't people that actually dump on minorities. Yes, they've got people who have treated the native Indian very badly. They've even had not such a good track record in terms of black people. But generally speaking, they aren't a nasty people. They're not a nasty people at all. And since I've got dozens of relatives over there, I may say that I stay in touch with them. And they have some considerable concern about what's happening. And even at a distance, I can understand why they have that concern. Because Mr. Trudeau, who is their present Prime Minister, is not a man, and his family is not inclined to be very sympathetic to the citizen. They do tend to think in terms of central authority. And one particular instance that I lived through is that the present Prime Minister's father, Mr. Pierre Trudeau, one time in the 60s, declared martial law in Canada. And as people pointed out, people in the northwest of British Columbia, in places like Prince Rupert, which is a tiny little village, fishing village in the northwest, or Terrace, or for that matter the Yukon, with thousands and thousands of miles from where the reason for the martial law was invoked, could be sent to prison broadly for criticizing the local school teacher. Now, under martial law, of course, it really is all the protective legislation is suspended, and it's the army can be sent in. Paramilitaries, well, I don't know about paramilitaries, but semi-military organisations such as the police can be told to arrest people without rhyme or reason. So it's a dangerous situation. And in that case, it was invoked because the FLQ, the Fédération Libération de Québec, was making noises, indulging in some terrorist activity, and in fact had some lines of communication with the Irish Republican Army at the time to terrorise the population. But there was a diplomat, seems to me that his name was Cross, although I can't remember exactly, but who was kidnapped and was taken into some hideaway in a suburb, I think, of Montreal, and held at gunpoint. Now, eventually, it turned out that really it was a mafia type difference. It had nothing to do with overthrowing the government or anything else. But that was a knee-jerk reaction. Now, politicians have knee-jerk reactions, and the Canadians particularly, and so I am very interested in using Canada as a bellwether. If the Canadians are getting upset about erosion of freedom, believe me, I think then we should, if we meet similar circumstance. Rupert Lloyd Thomas, who is from Lewis and who went to live in Canada for a while, and like me, keeps an eye on that country and has a great fondness for it. But he pointed out that almost all media there are now subsidised one way or another by various handouts from the state. And that means, of course, is that are you going to bite the hand that feeds you? It's a very good question. are we in this country now, after the lockdown largesse, in a similar situation where all sorts of media received funding? We received a little bit. Well, I say a little bit. A little bit. It was a little bit, and it was too little, too late. And that's why we're making an appeal at the moment to try and get ourselves back on track and do the job that we want to do properly. Not easy, I'm afraid. Not easy. Mostly people do not understand when our freedoms are being eroded. They're probably, to what I say this morning, those people that do listen and watch, is, oh, come on, Keith. Come on, you really, what do you think you're on about? We're in nowhere near as bad a situation. But we are, you know. And the funny thing is that a kettle and a pot come to mind because the erosion of a freedom is sometimes not coming even from the government. It's coming from the people who own the big Google type media operations. And they are media. One instance I will give you is that we put up a video about 5 years ago on, I think it was Facebook. Forgive me if it wasn't. It was Facebook or Google. And it was taken down, and we were warned for putting up obscene material. The obscene material was a little video clip of our war memorial, which stands in the middle of the town. Because the way that these things are determined is not by humans. Oh no. Humans are giving up all sorts of self-regulation. No, it's done by algorithms, I believe is the word, where computers actually put little bits together and then make a decision. Oh, God help me. The reason being is that this very fine memorial is that there are ladies, nymphs, I think, at the base, draped in rather tasteful robes, but at least on one of them, there is a bare breast. And the algorithm thingamajig had picked up that there was a bare breast on this piece of video. Now, it was on a very respectable statue that has been there since 1923, 24. The thousands and thousands and thousands of people have passed during the daytime and the night time and going through Lewis, and indeed where we stand around and remember our dead. But the algorithm decided that it was obscene. Now, that sort of thing is frightening. So, before we actually go chasing our politicians, perhaps we can understand a little bit why they are attempting to bring in legislation which stops excesses. But having said that, when I look through, I am not at all sure that people like Piers Morgan, for instance, and some of our better commentators in the newspapers, Little John, cannot be brought to book because of the things that they say. Yes, they say them mostly not on the internet in the first instance, but in their newspapers. But those newspapers go onto the internet. And if this legislation is aimed at that sort of thing, as indeed it would be aimed at the sort of thing that I'm doing now, if it considers it to be extreme enough. And I don't know, because I have yelled and stamped my little feet over a whole host of people in governance, from the top in Westminster to the town council. In fact, further than that, to the parish councils. Am I actually breaking freedom of expression? For once, I'm wondering whether I'm going to actually get a note saying, don't do it again, or shut down your television operation. Because this legislation, while it's specific on many things, has got loose edges. It's got borders which are there to be broken, not by those who will fight for free speech, but for those who want to curb it. And that is the wrong way round. That's almost like a Napoleonic law. You are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. Well, the establishment of law in this country has always been you are innocent until you prove yourself guilty, or you're proven guilty. Not prove yourself. Sometimes that happens. And if that's the way that we're looking at this legislation, I want to make absolutely sure that because in many ways our constitution is based on precedent and by law. Actually, I say our constitution because we don't really have one. We're a country without a constitution, but we have a rule of law basis for our civilized behaviour, but which is subject to review and a great deal of change, if we so wish. And is this an opportunity for politicians who hate people like us? They're very sensitive to the way that we quite often perceive their behaviour. I call it flim-flam. I see people going around, and I don't think for one moment that many of them think that they're lying. They've convinced themselves that some of the things that they're doing, like their approach to homelessness and to mental health, and to that matter, the way that we deal with our finances, either locally or internationally, is okay. Thank you. And if you're going to criticise it, we don't like you very much. Well, if that can be legislated out of existence, wow, are we in trouble? And already, years and years and years, the accounts for the European Union have never been signed off. And I can't remember her name, but there was a lady auditor who said that she refused to sign off on any accounts that she considered not to reflect the true position of the finances of the EU, and they sacked her. Now, when you've got that sort of power, I don't like what you're saying, I'm going to sack you. And then when you think about this legislation, we're not quite sure where you stand. So what we'll do is we'll shut you up. It becomes a frightening possibility, and one that needs to be monitored very carefully. Monitored by us, but also monitored by the average citizen, and by organisations. And I don't just mean things like Greenpeace and some of the acknowledged defenders, or so-called defenders, of excesses by government. I mean the average Joe. The average person needs to keep an eye on. And eventually it will come through. You'll get a buff envelope one day which will threaten you with all sorts of things which you didn't think you could be threatened with, because you either haven't done something or you have that you're supposed to do. And that is a terrifying thought. For us in the United Kingdom to have to suffer what Europeans suffered from a variety of governments in most of the last century is a real worry. And getting back to what's happening in Europe at the moment is many people have defended the EU and said it's because of the EU that we have peace in Europe, or we've had such a long area of peace. And they've intimated that it will continue to be that. That the way that the EU behaves has shut down the ability of dictators to up and try and take something which is not theirs. Well, it's very interesting to see what will happen in the next little while. Is it true? Is it true? I ask the question because actually the one thing that I learn as I go on in life, and I'm sure that the many people the same age as me, is that there is no truth as such. What you have to do is to have a look very carefully at what's happening in our society. Very carefully. Because well-meaning people sometimes put us into shocking situations, or shocking situations start to generate legislation that is not in the best interests of a free society. How far does freedom go? That's another good question. All these things have been debated and sloshed around in pubs and clubs and all sorts of other places over the years. It has. But every time that a government brings in legislation which is designed to stop somebody saying something that we don't like, that is distasteful, much as the end result may be desired, we've got to make sure that along the way, I think the term is that we throw out the baby with the bathwater. And that because of the hate speech, yes, hate, isms, picking on different parts of society is all very distasteful. But it doesn't deserve rushed legislation. It deserves what our government at the moment is trying to persuade us is the correct thing as far as Russia is concerned, is hey, let's think about it and talk about it and debate about it. Yeah, well, what is good for the goose, let's make sure is good for the gander. That's my rant for Monday morning. And not a bad rant at all, I think. Lots of other things that are going on that I'd love to rant about. That's all I can stand. I'm damn sure it's all you can stand as well. What time are we? It's 8:39, and let me just advise you of what it's like outside this morning, because it started off at 1 degree and it's going to go up to 10, which is not bad. It'll be fairly warm throughout the day. Slight chance of rain in the middle of the day and towards the end, but other than that, only a very slight breeze and plenty of sunny intervals. And we've got sunny intervals at the moment. There are lots of puffy clouds around, but we also got some nice sunshine shining through. So there we are. That's the way we stand at the moment, and where we stand and how we stand. Welcome to a Monday Morning Blues. I just hope that the West isn't going to fiddle while Eastern Europe burns. It is easily done to let it happen. It is easily done to misinterpret legislation. Lots of things easily done. The tough part is to get it right. And I hope that our leaders, who have not covered themselves in glory over the past year or two, I hope they get it right on this one. Because if they don't, we're in for one hell of a battering. Doodle bib. Oh, go on. Let's remind ourselves. And let's write him out. Well, the old phone is going already, so I better say toodle pip, and away I go. Toodle, toodle, toodle pip. Hope you have a good day. See you tomorrow morning, hopefully without war having broken out.